98% usage rate on one card. But what was that card? This is how much the card with the highest usage rate ever has had. Wait a second, how is this possible? There is no way a card managed to get into 98% of decks, right? Even the Phoenix and Goblin machine couldn't do it. So in this video I will go over 4 cards that at one point had a crazy high use rate, including one with 98%. And trust me, it is probably not even close to what you think. Before talking about cards with crazy high use rates, we have to understand what does a usage rate even mean, and more importantly, why is it so important to talk about. Usage rates mostly have 2 main categories that they fit in, the casual and the advanced. The casual usage rate basically says one thing: how much people in ladder play a specific card in their deck. This data can sometimes be useful to look at, but usually you just ignore this one. The advanced usage rate, on the other hand, is a lot different. This time, instead of how much people use a card on ladder, it's about how much they use them in grand challenges. This data compared to the casual is about 10,000 times more important. This thing basically tells you what's good and what's not, and this data directly correlates to one of the 2 factors that decides the usage rates. The factor that makes this function and the factor that makes Clash Royale a much better game. This factor is balance changes. For many people, balance changes are the only reason for usage rates to be important. But why exactly are balance changes even useful? Why can't you just balance the game in one move and fix all of the usage rates? Balance changes are made to make the game fresh, not always to balance it. If the game was always perfectly balanced, every single strategy is going to be found and the game will get boring. It's good to have a few good and a few bad cards swapping around 3 to 15% just to make things fresh. That's why Clash Royale never did a one-time balance, and this is why usage rates are so important. So now that you know everything about usage rates, what happens when the game doesn't moderate this and the card doesn't have a 3 to 15% usage rate, but an 80%? Well, this will happen.
Oh god. Oh my god. Best state this game has ever been in. We win! Big surprise! We win with 7, 10, 20, 30, 40 Phoenix.
The Phoenix is so strong. How's that even legal? Oh my god. I have 3 Phoenixes on the map. Oh my god. Oh my god. The Phoenix is still alive. And it rebirthed.
That's not enough. Oh my gosh, did we just win? There's no way we just won like this. This is the dumbest way to win in Clash Royale. Why did this just happen? We just won the game. There's nothing he can do. He literally cannot...
What the hell just happened? To understand this, we have to go back to October of 2022 when the Phoenix was released on Clash Royale. Now, on the surface, nothing seemed weird about it. It was just a 4 elixir card that had good air defense and could respawn from an egg. This card seemed pretty cool, but not that outstanding. So how exactly did it manage to get an 81% usage rate? That seems really weird. Well, there was actually one thing about the Phoenix that people only realized when it was too late. The Phoenix on release, for just 4 elixir, had his stats way too strong. His DPS was ridiculous, he could fly, the Phoenix could respawn from an egg which was a lot more tanky, and go back to full HP. The balancing of this thing was so messed up that Clash Royale had to emergency nerf this thing twice, and nerf again and again, and after about 7 nerfs, the Phoenix was in an okay place. And this was the first of 2 issues that cause high usage rates. Balancing issues. But what if I told you that the Phoenix is not the worst example? That there was something less balanced than this. Something way more OP and with a higher usage rate. June of 2024. The worst state that Clash Royale has ever been in. The game has the least amount of active players, everyone is clowning on it, and there are almost no new cards. The last few updates weren't that impressive, we only got lucky drops and 2 broken tower troops, everything was just getting stale for a long time, and because of that, Clash Royale finally decided to release an update. And this time, they were willing to do something completely different. On this update, Clash Royale would decide to add a few things. First of all, a new ladder mode, a new goblin launcher mechanic, 2 new evolutions, and most importantly, 3 more cards. Now, most of the stuff in this update was pretty good. A new mechanic plus a new trophy road sounds like a lot of new stuff to do in the game, and for most people, it pretty much was. But this wasn't the issue in this update, because as I said about this update, 3 new cards were released. And as I've said earlier, this time the balancing of them went completely south. And of these 3 cards, the Goblin Machine had something very unique to it. You see, just like the Phoenix, the thing about the Goblin Machine wasn't just fundamental. The Goblin Machine was physically way too strong. He had so much HP, and the worst part, every single rocket that he used did 1000 damage to everything including the tower. Yeah, it was really messed up. And very shortly after the update, people started to abuse this card. It was so good that even Mirror had a high usage rate for the first in a long time. But I know what you truly want to know. How much usage rate did the Goblin Machine actually have? Well, to put it easily, the Goblin Machine was played in 83% of Grand Challenge decks. 83% of every single competitive game that you played was against the Goblin Machine. But the thing about the Goblin Machine and also the Phoenix is that they were broken only on their release, not because of anything else. But what if there was a card that had a very high usage rate that didn't get there on release? In fact, it got that usage rate 3 years after it came out. Well, this is exactly what would happen.
Right here, which just absolutely destroys. One more witch right here, guys, destroys the Inferno D. Now we can get a giant, no giant needed, guys.
Watch the witch here, y'all. The witch is actually going to be able to take out this baby dragon.
Now look at this, Witch on Sparky. Witch is almost going to solo that Sparky. That's insane. But again, Witch just doing absolute work. Now Witch is in like every deck, it feels like, in CRL. But pros this early on, better correction of words here, are recognizing just the sheer power and the brokenness of the Witch.
What was that? Why is the Witch, a card so trash, being so good? How is this possible? To understand this, we have to go back to October of 2019. At this time, Clash Royale was doing pretty well compared to now, but there was a big issue back then that much more people actually cared about. At this time, Clash Royale's meta was very frustrating. A lot of cards were getting in and out, just like I said, to keep the game fresh, but there was another issue that Clash Royale wanted to finally try and solve. They tried to solve the problem of useless cards. You see, at the time there were a lot of bad cards just like today, but they weren't actually treated the same way. Today we pretty much forgot about stuff like Barbarian Hut and Furnace, but at that state, the dev team still wanted to try. And in October of 2019, just like today, the Witch was really bad. But because this card was pretty toxic in mid-ladder, you couldn't just buffer and fix the issue. Every time they tried doing it, they just failed. So in the October 2019 season, Clash Royale would decide to give the Witch a rework. And if you are still wondering why the Witch is a bad card to this day, this will tell you exactly. This rework gave the Witch a few things: a small HP nerf, a splash nerf, a hit speed nerf, a spawn speed nerf, and a 220% damage buff. 220% damage buff. Yeah, what the f was this? I don't know how at the time it was considered decent, but I guess sometimes you can just slightly miss this kind of stuff. Anyways, as you can probably imagine, the Witch turned from a skeleton spawner that did almost nothing except that to a slightly worse skeleton spawner that became an absolute damage machine. This was completely game-breaking on so many other levels. One of the worst cards in the game just became top 1, but this video isn't about how broken a card was. It's about something else. That's right, the Witch in October of 2019 was in 55% of Grand Challenge decks. Now, this may not seem like too much, but you gotta remember, this is the Witch. She was a bad card basically forever. Even right now she's completely useless, so having the entire meta around the Witch of all cards was definitely something worth saying. But now, as I've covered the 3 cards that at one point had a crazy high usage rate, you're probably waiting for the one single card. The card with the highest usage rate in the history of Clash Royale. A card that was not only broken, but had another factor that made it appear 98% of the times. And the answer might shock you. It might also come from the sky and stun you for 0.5 seconds. That's right, the card with the highest usage rate ever was the Zap. and this was the only time in Clash Royale's history that something like this could ever happen. So let's go back to when the Zap had a 98% usage rate. It's 2016. Clash Royale is a semi-new game, the meta is constantly developing and people are realizing new strategies. But on July of 2016, there were a few unique things that affected the Zap. A bit before this time though, the Zap wasn't actually that good. Even the main effect of the Zap, which was the stun, didn't even exist back then. And because of that, everybody just used arrows for a better deal. So in the months prior to July, the Zap got a few buffs. It got the stun ability, it got damage buffs, and it basically dethroned arrows and started to rise. It could even kill goblins and had a 1-second stun instead of 0.5. And so the Zap started to rise. And maybe rise a little more, maybe a bit too much rising. Yeah, it was way too much. So in July, in order to make Zap go down as the only good spell, Clash Royale decided to do something and release the Log. But as I said in my video about the worst cards ever, on release, the Log was one of the worst cards to ever exist in the game. And in the exact same season that this happened, on the top 100 players of all of Ladder, the Zap was included in 98% of the decks. If you play the game against a top 100 player, 98 of these guys had Zap. And in the next few months, the Zap would constantly get nerfed, until it could no longer kill goblins and the Log took his place. But there is actually one very unique thing about this video, and that is that there are a lot more cards like this. And if you decided to subscribe right now, I will make a part 2 with much crazier stories.